discussion on the diversity gap in STEM, an unresolved issue on which a sustainable future depends. Je suis Geneviève Tanguay, je suis la vice-présidente responsable des technologies émergentes au CNRC and champion for women in STEM. I would like to acknowledge that NRC facilities, and you all are, on the traditional unceded territories of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Their ancestral footsteps and rights extend beyond the boundaries that exist today. And we respectfully honor these people's rights, history, and relationships with this land. Humanity is facing tremendous and global sustainability challenges such as climate change, water scarcity, and GHG. As exemplified in the recent COP26 meetings on climate change, and also to our relatives, colleagues, and friends in British Columbia as they brace themselves for another downpour, and out east as they await another storm. These are urgent and complex challenges that require the mobilization of diverse, global, and intense efforts. Reducing the gender gap and increasing the participation of women and other underrepresented groups in STEM is a critical move to meet the UN Resolution on 2030 agenda. The goal is to achieve gender equality and ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. We are privileged to welcome a panel with diverse expertise on global sustainability and experiences from across the academic, public, and not-for-profit sectors. Our panelists will also share a strong interest and commitment to increasing diversity and inclusion in multiple domains of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as in entrepreneurship and in decision-making and leadership in order to achieve a sustainable future. I will briefly introduce our panelists, but will ask them to introduce themselves by highlighting their key experiences and interest. So Mr. Caleb Z. Ben is the Director, Rights at the Assembly of First Nations. Madame Diane Campbell is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Meteorological Services of Canada at the Environment and Climate Change Canada and Canada's permanent representative to the World Meteorological Organization. Sophie Damour est la première femme vice-rectrice de l'Université Laval. Elle est aussi ingénieure forestière. Alison Nankivel is a Senior Vice President, Fund Investment and Global Scaling at the Business Development Bank of Canada. And Eliane Ubalijoro is the Director of Future Earth Global Hub, Canada, and Professor of Practice of Public-Private Sector Partnership at McGill University Institute for the Study of International Development. So questions and comments can be shared throughout the session in the live Q&A channel. And time permitting, audience questions will be paused to the panel or specific panelists during the panel discussion. So please participate with us. An open question period is also scheduled following the panel discussion. And so I'll ask the panelists to please introduce yourself by sharing the key sustainability issues within your area of expertise and the communities, gender, Indigenous, or others that you engage with to increase diversity and representation. And the first person I'm calling was Caleb Ben. Yes. And so I'm going to Sophie Damour. Please, can you please present yourself? We've had a bit of a technical issue with a couple of our panelists.
C'est un plaisir d'être avec vous. Thank you, Geneviève. I will say a few words, Geneviève. My life has changed from vice rector to rector. We used to be side by side at the time. So I'm the rector of Université Laval and very concerned by the two issues we're discussing today, increasing diversity in our university and particularly in the STEM area. as well as building a more sustainable world. And my thoughts are definitively with our friends and family in BC who are going through very difficult time at this moment. These, and we all know, I believe that these two issues of diversity and sustainability are deeply linked, and this is a unique opportunity to have this discussion because we need every group of our society to sit at the table, to be part of discussions, so we make better decisions collectively, and that we integrate the perspective of a broader group, more diversified. We all know that the coming year are to be transformative, and therefore we need to engage in a meaningful, revised approach and how we listen and integrate and co-construct, co-build together that future world. So we know that many women, First Nation, and underrepresented groups are still a minority in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that these areas of study lead to careers that permit to induce true emerging technologies, important societal transformation. Technology is all over the world, and it does have a significant impact in shaping our world. We cannot afford to exclude the voice of the different groups of the population in thinking of our future. And in this perspective, universities must offer more training for that will focus on these major challenges facing societies, trajectories that are more flexible, more personalized, more interdisciplinary. Professions are changing. Sociologists are interested in technology. Artists are concerned about the health benefits of their art. Managers want a greener and more sustainable society. So we absolutely must continue to open up disciplinary and intellectual boundaries. It is a way of being more inclusive. It is a question of calling upon all talents to bring knowledge and solutions to the great challenges of sustainable development. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Sophie. The next person I would go with is Alison and Kivel. So Alison, would you please introduce yourself and your interest?
Yes, thank you so much, Geneviève. It's lovely to be here and be part of such an important panel and discussion. I think, as Sophie mentioned, these two issues, diversity and sustainability, we would also agree from a BDC Capital perspective, are really important. So as mentioned, I'm part of the Business Development Bank of Canada, the part of BDC Capital, which is the risk capital investment side of the bank. As many of you may know, BDC is focused on providing financing, risk capital, advisory support to Canadian entrepreneurs to really help that next generation of companies succeed and grow to be the source of our future prosperity. And I think we bring this issue to the lens of investing in those most promising technology companies as we do on the BDC Capital side, the lens of making sure we're investing to include and support the most diverse range of diverse range of entrepreneurs we can. But in addition, those entrepreneurs and those companies who are kind of approaching their business with a sustainable mindset. And I think it's very interesting how those two, I'm very, in my area, I'm very focused on investing both at the funds level as well as BDC invests directly into companies. So we invest in venture capital fund managers who then provide capital to entrepreneurs and across all sectors, across all stages. But we also invest in directly into technology companies. And we really have now realized that, the best potential in Canada is to reach into working with those entrepreneurs who have a combined vision about how they will build a sustainable company, one that will be contributing to climate solutions, to having a balanced operations, whether they're in the clean technology sector or not, but having a sustainable way of operating their business, in addition to having a mindset of I think, building an inclusive culture in their own company that will attract the best talent. Because we know going forward, as a bank, as well as, as we support our portfolio companies and our lending clients, that the best companies are the companies that are able to attract the best talent. And talent these days of, the most valuable younger workers that we see in Canada are interested in working for companies that have a sense of purpose that's larger than earning money. They want to be part of companies that are thinking about sustainability, that are thinking about inclusiveness and building the broadest range of talent in the company possible. And so I think we really do see that there's a very strong reason to bring that mindset collectively as we look to work with companies, as I said, both at the fund manager level when we invest in venture capital funds, as well as when we directly invest into companies. And I think some of the things we can talk about later in the panel about some of the areas that we've been working to ensure that we have Indigenous entrepreneurs who are being provided capital, women entrepreneurs who are being provided capital to be able to build their businesses, as well as BIPOC entrepreneurs and other members who have had less access to what they need to really build their businesses and succeed in Canada. And I think we really will all benefit once, as this panel is talking about today, we take those two pieces and we see them in a much more, I think, cohesive, systematic way, and when we're approaching our respective areas of activity. So thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Absolutely right. I'm glad to see that Caleb Bent joined us again. So Caleb, would you please introduce yourself and give us the key sustainability issues that you're interested in?
Masicho, Geneviève, and also Masicho for the territorial acknowledgement. I'm probably pretty choppy because I'm coming to you from a reserve, my mom's reserve, the West Mobley First Nation, edge of Treaty 8 in Daneza territory. I'm at Shredene in Daneza, so the Patriarchal Indian Act registered me to my dad's res, which is about 500 kilometers closer to the Yukon border. I'm in the top corner of the northeast British Columbia, and what they call British Columbia. And I think this has been like kind of a poignant example of the key sustainability challenge as it relates to STEM, because digital equity access in every sense is the core challenge. And I'm like experiencing it, and I'm sorry for having a low quality bandwidth connection. There's a lot of other issues I want to get to, but I think in the recognizing time, I'll be brief. But just understand that I'm coming from an Indigenous perspective, and to be clear, whilst I work for the Assembly First Nations as Director of Rights, I'm here only on my personal behalf. You can check out my bio and stuff if you want to see a bit of the other things I've done. I look forward to the discussion, and also please use the Q&A or the discussion forum. I think there's a rich discourse to be had here, but that's my introduction, with apologies to my co-presenters and to you as attendees. This is literally what it's like in the reserve in 2021.
Thank you very much, Caleb. You're right to mention this. Equity is also about equity to those means of communications that we have. Eliane, may I ask you est-ce que je peux vous demander de prendre la relève aussi, de présenter les différents points qui vous intéressent davantage par rapport à l'équité?
Oui, absolument. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être ici. So I have various interests. So I came to Canada 30 years ago to study agriculture and go back to my homeland of Rwanda to work with farmers, and Civil War started. And so I have been in Canada for the last 32 years, and I work globally on issues of climate justice, of environmental sustainability, food security, and equity for all. And so I would say the issues for me are really important in terms of how do we ensure inclusive innovation, that everybody has a seat at the table and the tools needed to participate. I really appreciate Caleb's comments around the importance of digital access and how critical that is for collective participation, and how important it is for all of us to be able to have those tools. And so for me, it's really critical as we look at the challenges we face in the 21st century to ensure that we are not leaving anybody behind because we are not giving them the tools for them to participate. And it's really critical that the most vulnerable, because often the most vulnerable are the ones who are most affected by the climate crisis, are the ones who lead us in how we decide to address the current challenges we face, because the people who are closest to the problems are also the people who are closest to the solutions. And working collectively together is really critical in terms of having solutions that are sustainable and that are really going to allow us to move forward effectively. And so I would say those are the areas that I'm particularly passionate about in terms of the work I do globally. And in Canada, the work we're doing in Canada in terms of sustainability in the digital age and future Earth are also around how can Indigenous leadership really lead nature-based solutions as Canada is looking at 2030 and 2050 targets, and that without that leadership, we will fail. And so one of the things we are really pushing forward and we're doing actively is engaging with Indigenous experts and leaders all over Canada to talk about what are the solutions that they see they're participating in, they're contributing in, and making sure that as many people are aware of those so that we can collectively contribute to growing and scaling them and supporting these solutions, and to realize that without that, we are really working with only very minimal strengths in terms of how we can effectively move forward. I'll stop there.
Eliane. So I was supposed to present also Diane Campbell. Sadly, she's got technical difficulties to join us, so maybe she'll join us a little later. The first question is, what are the main challenges and gaps for mitigating or solving key sustainability challenges in your field or disciplines or in your environment? And are any challenges specific to Canada? And I'm tempted to ask any of you to answer this question because you're all involved in different areas. So how do you feel that what are the main challenges and gaps that you see? Can I start with you, Caleb?
Assuming my internet functions, I'll be brief. I'm not a scientist in the Western tradition. I'm a lawyer by training. So for me, I got into law because I want to understand the language of power that the colonial government used to disempower my people and actively destroy and denigrate both the world that we depend upon, but also like the preceding cultural knowledge systems that I have the privilege of being connected to on both my mother and father's side. And for me personally, the gap that I think is critical is the interface between the legal and systemic structuring systems of our shared society and the expertise and technical capacity of the research community, the entrepreneurial community, and the business community. And to build upon Eliane's point a moment ago, my view is that Canada has some unique strengths as yet unrealized because the unique status, no pun intended, I have Indian status, I have a number. I was tempted to get it tattooed on me, actually, sort of a low-key joke about the Canadian nation state and how they violated my father when he was 5 years old and sent him to residential school under the rule of law. But the other side of that dark history, and I'll just note for the panelists and for the attendees, yesterday was the 25th anniversary of the release of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples with final report. And that Royal Commission was put forward after the Oka crisis. And I think for me, being not a scientist, but a lawyer, I think the legal interface with science, evidence-based decision-making, with sophisticated concepts of how we interface with the world, human and non-human, is probably the richest place for opportunity. But then again, there's the equity problem because I literally don't have a functional internet because I take care of 2 elders on my reserve, which is why I'm not on Algonquin territory. I'll leave it there. Masicho.
Merci beaucoup. Sophie, de ton côté, what kind of challenges and gap for mitigating or solving the key sustainability challenge in, for example, forestry engineering? What do you see there?
Well, I will take it more broadly. I think that one of the challenges to be appreciative of the real challenge of sustainability. We have 17 goals, and these 17 goals are difficult to embrace with every initiative we want to move on at the same time. And we need to develop our capacity to present these transformative, transitional proposal in a way that they attract and mobilize the greatest talent and a great diversity of talent, so that we are actively transforming our way of living, the way we develop our economy, and the way we take care of the most fragile and vulnerable people around us. And as we are moving on, there's a lot of polarization around many effort going up front, and particularly around the contribution of technology. And I think there is a challenge in having a broader understanding of les voies de passage. How are we going to be able to transition and to have a transition that will not leave anyone behind? And when we try to do that and we don't have active members of minority group around the table, makes it harder to really embrace the perspective and the view of this diversity that is required to make sure that la voie de passage, the way forward, are the right way to go. And I feel that the fact, and I'll talk more specifically about women not being too much engaged in engineering still, and computing science and AI development, all of these, I think there is a gap there, because we need the voice of these women and defining at least the usage of these technologies in our society. It would be even better to have more being actively in the development of it, but there is something there that is a gap that we need to fill. I would put it in those two perspectives. The one that is making sure that we learn how to address our 17 goals, not as a way to blockage and polarize, but as a way to improve and prepare and propose better solutions. And to do so, be more inclusive in the team that is actively engaged in, building the solution, and for sure defining how this should go and be implemented in the next stage.
Excellent. Merci beaucoup. Alison, you have a word to add on that? As how you see it now, you see entrepreneurs, you see them as young, starting, and they want to have the right values, and they want to go and with the sense of purpose that you were talking about. So what's missing? What could we fill as a gap?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a couple of observations. I think just what we're struggling as a bank that we see. One is that we have this existing community of small and mid-sized companies in Canada who understand the urgency of say, sustainability, but they work in traditional businesses. They don't know how to move their businesses to a more sustainable path, because the educational resources, the people, the capital that help them on that journey, and most of it at this point is actually informational. And we're finding this, and so we are in the middle of building these tools to help small and mid-sized companies understand that journey. As Sophie was mentioning, of moving your existing operations to a more sustainable path. That's one challenge for existing business. For those young and upcoming businesses, especially the technology-oriented businesses that I was talking about, where you have young founders, I think what we're looking at is that a lot of the needs that are part of the sustainability solutions haven't been invented yet, or they're sitting in labs, or they're sitting, some part of the solutions are sitting in different places. And like many of the panelists here have already said, we haven't brought the combination of people together in a different way that's going to solve things. I think that it's really the case that there are a lot of people out there working close at the level of their community who see solutions that deserve capital, deserve support to grow, to provide a sustainable path for their community. And in that, we need to make sure we are bringing, as I said, that more inclusive group of people together. But we also have to kind of bring capital, the traditional financial industry, to look at things differently and work in maybe a different way with these innovative founders to build mechanisms to get those solutions, those sustainability solutions up to scale, to be part of solving the problems of reducing our GHG emissions. There's just a lot, if you look from a infrastructure perspective, that has to be built in Canada to put us on the path to reducing GHG. And that won't happen if we don't bring parties together in a different way than they have before. So part of what we see at BDC is playing a bit of that intermediary role, bringing traditional finance, bringing traditional players, investors who work with us together with different kinds of founders in different models of cooperation. Because if we don't find new paths or new forms of organizing ourselves and bringing a different lens of how we think about building those solutions, I just don't think we're going to get there, because conventional paths, as we've all noted, aren't inclusive enough about bringing the talent around the table at the level with the local knowledge and mindset to really push the agenda on sustainability. So to me, it's less about what's the gap. It's almost like the gap is we have these discrete, like there's no shortage of capital in the world. There's no shortage of innovative companies out there. There's no shortage of talented people who come in, from different parts of the world who are just not being included in this dialogue. It's bringing them together in novel ways. And I think there's a real role for us as respective organizations involved in different ways in public policy to really be part of that solution of bringing people together in different ways.
Yeah, we have to look at the paradigm of how we bring those people together for sure. Eliane, you're not looking only at Quebec or Canada, you're looking at the world in terms of future Earth. How do you bring different communities, different languages, different cultures together? We already have different language and cultures in Canada, but how do you bring it at the Earth level?
Well, I think part of it is, is there's the local work and the global work, and it's how we connect both. And I think part of it is, awareness of just the data. If we look at venture capital investment around the world, we know that less than 10% of venture capitalists are women. We know that women represent probably less than 10% CEOs who are getting funding, even though in terms of the women's leadership, their capacity to actually have profitable companies is significantly higher. And so the data shows us we're not doing the work that data-driven decision-making should help us do. So we know that there are still immense bias, and that bias is even worse if you look at BIPOC entrepreneurs or their presence in terms of the investment space themselves. People invest in people who look like them. And so part of it is we need to create spaces where people get to know each other, get to know the data, know their own biases, and know that those biases play against us. There was a mention of artificial intelligence. So I just finished contributing to a piece that's going to be published in partnership between UNESCO and the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms on blind spots in AI. And so the data there is also showing us a lot of work needs to be done, not only in terms of including women, including people of color, indigenous populations, but also thinking about artificial intelligence through different frameworks. And I think about my colleague, Jason Lewis, who's a professor at Concordia, who has done a lot of work around indigenous artificial intelligence protocol. What does it mean to look at artificial intelligence from different points of view? And so it's critical that we realize that working in a cross-cultural space is difficult. will require discomfort be held collectively and not only by people at the margins. And it's also important to understand the data. I mean, only 0.2% of philanthropic funding in climate goes to gender-related projects. And so you think about, women representing half the population of the earth and how gender is almost absent in climate philanthropy. I mean, those are immense important issues. You think about the 570 million smallholder farmers in the world who feed 70% of the population of the planet. And you think most of those are women. And we know that they have difficulty access digital tools. They have difficult accessing finance. And so because of that, they were producing 20 to 30% less on the land that they have. And we know that there are 3 billion people who are food insecure in the world. We know that over 800 million go hungry and that 9 million people die of hunger every year. And so empowering women is a critical way for us to meet a number of sustainable development goals in terms of poverty, in terms of food security, in terms of gender equity, climate action. And so it's very critical to create spaces to convene people, to discuss all of these issues, and to allow literacy around gender, how gender matters for sustainability. Because I still think we live in a time where most people are unaware. If we think about population growth, empowering women today, there's over 240 million women in the developing world who would like access to contraception and don't. And that could be a difference between now and the end of the century of 1 billion extra people on the planet. And so we have to think, are we empowering women in the world? And that empowerment is critical to how we address the pressures that we're putting on the planet. And so how we involve women in how we move forward in terms of climate action is very critical. And I really feel that there's a huge part that is about literacy and engaging collectively, and amplifying the voices of the marginalized is very critical.
Absolutely. Très bien. Merci beaucoup, Eliane. Caleb, I'm going back to you. In your view, what are the opportunities for women, Indigenous people, and other underrepresented groups to develop and advance solutions for local, national, or global sustainability issues? So we're going back to local and global because we, as individual, local is a bit more easy than global. Go ahead, Caleb. Oh, I think your phone just let you go. You're frozen.
Okay. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we have you. Yeah, you're back. Caleb, do you hear me? All right. Well, going from Eliane's presentation, Sophie or Alison, would you have something to add as the opportunities for women or other represented groups to develop and advance solutions at the local level, at the regional level, or at the global level?
Maybe just, I'm sure, I think Sophie has quite a lot to say on this, but maybe just to kind of give our sense of the statistics, because I don't disagree with what Eliane said, but just to understand that we actually have made progress in bringing women into the VC ecosystem. Certainly within Canada, we've played an instrumental role in that. We have put the world's largest women in technology fund out in Canada with our $250 million fund that we put in the market in 2018. We've supported through that over 35 companies, female founders who are really growing their companies. On the financing side, we have about 15,000 women entrepreneur clients, about 1.75 billion. We put into the market and created Stand Up Ventures, which is another women-led fund. And one of the things, because I think this is really important, which Eliane referenced, which is that capital has to be allocated by people who see the value of working with diverse communities. So we think capital has to be managed by diverse managers, right? So we have put in the market, a Black Innovation Fund. We have the Indigenous Growth Fund. In our broader portfolio now, women are in 42% in lead roles across our portfolio as capital allocators, partners in these funds. And we have purposely done that to make sure that we are giving capital to women who bring a different lens of how they look for entrepreneurs in the market. And whether they are BIPOC or from a gender perspective, we believe that it is the case that if you don't give capital to people who come from these less represented communities, you will miss those entrepreneurs. You will not see them. They are not in your networks. And I think that is a really, really important thing. And, I think maybe just to add on to that work, as I said, we're trying to do to have capital in the hands of a more diverse community of people, and then thereby supporting diverse entrepreneurs, is this issue of, which I think is really interesting, about integrating a more across disciplines view of how we build solutions, because I think that's really critical too. I mean, I'm sitting here coming from the financial community. I'm on a panel with people who are coming from the academic community, from an NGO, a public policy community. And I think all of those things have to be kind of brought together to a much more horizontal dialogue, as I said, of how we build solutions and come together, which forces us to have different kinds of collaboration than, as I said, we've had before. And I think that's one of the most interesting and stimulating things that we can do, but it's hard work. It's hard work to break down people's respective bureaucracies to get them to think differently. And I do think women, by the way, of all of that, are hugely a big part of that role of being a voice to help with that, because I just think that community of having women across those different disciplines in different communities that are part of this solution will, I think, contribute to this sense of collaboration in a way that we maybe don't see in conventional systems of how we organize society now.
And I see that Diane just joined us after many technical issues. So I'm glad that you're back with us, Diane. I know that you had prepared something for the first question, so I'll quickly go back there. What do you see as the main challenges and gaps for mitigating and solving key sustainability challenges in your field disciplines? And are there any challenge specific to Canada?
Thank you very much. And first, I would like to say that I've been listening to the panel exchanges to date, even though I haven't been able to fully connect. So just want to acknowledge all the amazing comments made by my colleagues here and try not to repeat things that have already been said. My role at this point in time is I head Canada's Weather Service. And with that, I mean, the events in BC have never really seemed to draw, our business line, but also the implications of the work we do more to the forefront. And for me, I look at this, I see the impacts, I see that we forecast things well, and yet we still are unable to have properly perhaps influenced all of the outcomes and chain along the way to warn citizens and help enable better predictions. And so it's a time of real reflection for me about what does it mean in this context of a changing climate. What does it mean to actually serve our citizens? And what will we need to do in order to change the way we've even thought about the warning function in Canada and around the world? For me, sustainability, I grew up in the time when sustainable development came onto the world stage. And so for me, it's been a value and principle for many, many decades. And yet even that, think about how we used to talk about this, and even more recently, we thought about the balance of environmental, social, and economic, with still, I would say a leaning, more than a leaning towards the economic side. But what I see and what I feel is that increasingly this means social and environmental justice, and social and environmental justice must take its, exact place up with these other concepts which have been talked about for decades. In my business, we bring in resiliency and adaptation. So we have a lot of terminology, and yet as I listen to the panel speakers, there is so much commonality about identifying what we feel are some of the foundational principles, the root causes, and maybe what needs to change. So when I think about social and environmental justice, and I try to translate those concepts into my business line, and what does that mean? Essentially, what this means is to question fundamentally, whether the science actually has not had some fundamental biases in it to begin with. The way we monitor our environment, the way that we choose to develop the algorithms, which create, in fact, the products that we give to society. And clearly, to me, we're not only underserving remote and vulnerable communities, I don't think we truly understand what those vulnerabilities are. So going forward, in terms of what this would mean for us, without us being able to truly engage properly with different components of society, both in Canada and abroad, to integrate in the vulnerabilities and the impacts, not just meteorological thresholds. X amount of rain is going to fall within 2 hours. What that means in a community that gets very little rain or has gone through the wildfires, as we have seen in BC, is completely different than a community that has not gone through that. And to just maybe supplement, not repeat what I've heard from my colleagues, just to supplement some of the key messages. I mean, I would say that reinforce that although there is an incredible collaboration globally on being able to develop the products that Canadians see every day in terms of weather warnings and important information that goes to the Emergency Measures Organization, it's very good collaboration. In no way could I say that our business is representative of society. So while we're working to increase the representation of women, for example, at all levels in the business line, we have a long ways to go, and that will take more than dedicated action. I can provide a few good examples if you want me to segue just into the first question, where dedicated efforts to say that if we have governance, if we have expert teams, if we have collaborations and all of the structures that help to support the business that creates a daily weather forecast in Canada, we say, at the international level, we must have at least 40% women represented at all levels of those structures, from expert teams up into the sort of elected presidents and vice presidents of the World Meteorological Organization. Are we there? Are we at 40%? I mean, that isn't even 50%. Are we at 40%? No, we're not. We set this target in 2015, and we're averaging more at between 25 and 32% representation of women that comprise the basic sort of researchers and expert teams, all the way up to those who are in leadership positions to guide the work of the WMO. The positive message is that that commitment was made, and that commitment is benchmarked and reviewed continuously. So we're aware of the statistics. The other thing that we recognize that we need is that being able to attract and create the right environment for women to want to stay in the business. It's maths, it's physics. As my colleague said, we don't have the correct representation of women in those base programs to begin with. When they come into the workforce, often the work environment is not supporting them as much as it should. We see a very strong bias, basically from a family perspective, so that women need to make choices that they shouldn't have to make with respect to the balance, work-life balance. Whether you're an operational forecaster who has to work 12.5-hour shifts in the daytime or the nighttime, these are real barriers that we need to rethink, to have a modern workforce that takes into account that this is how society needs to function going forward. And maybe I'll pause there because I was trying to just pick things that I hadn't heard from other colleagues. But for me, when something like what has happened in BC this year happens, where you have unprecedented heat domes, absolutely terrifying wildfires, and then we have the recent events. These are tipping points. These are moments where Canadians and people at all levels really can concretize the fact that what we say about climate change is very real. And when it actually happens, it's terrifying and devastating at all levels. And so, to me, my takeaway from this is the time really to act when people appreciate and understand and are living the reality of these impacts. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
And we have to build a solidarity of all actors into this to make sure that we are indeed making a change somewhere. We need everyone, all hands on deck for sure. Caleb, I know you're back. Is there any possibility that you answer the question I asked of you? I know you hear us and you can talk.
Yeah, sorry guys, this is super awkward, but real. I posted most everything I was thinking and awkwardly spoke into a dead screen in the discussion forum.
Okay.
But what I would say is just, I think the biggest opportunity and the biggest, in light of the heat dome, which actually closed the Alaska Highway due to a fire, so I couldn't go watch the destruction of the residential school that destroyed my father up in Lower Post in the Yukon border, and then the floods denied me access to go down south to see a friend of mine with stage 4 cancer. And I suspect that, and this is the last point I just made in the discussion, that the paths and processes have to be led by those who understand the critical empowerment mechanisms or disempowerment mechanisms. And, as I think the only self-identifying male on the panel on gender issues, I don't want to be seen to speak for anyone else, but to my co-panelists and to the women in the attending the session, I would bet that you understand better the subtle systems or the overt mechanisms of disempowerment and the critical empowerment necessary, and true with Indigenous people as well. It's like, as was said earlier, those closest to the problem probably have the most profound insight into the solution. The challenge, though, with STEM is that you also have complex, multi-layered structures, contemplating, Allison's work on accessing capital, Eliane's work on, Indigenous knowledge systems and systems of power, my work on law and legal systems, right? Diane's work on sort of data and analysis. Like, you see in this mix and melange a challenging systems problem, but my suspicion is that it's all should be led by those who have expertise that's unique and hard-earned. The challenge is going to be, what about all the other people who have to step back, step out, and step up as allies? And I think that's the more interesting discussion in this conference in particular, is a unique space to engage that question. Science policy is a pretty profound issue. I'll leave it.
You're very right about the allyship. That's so important. And for allyship to work best is to know each other as much as we can. And as you were going around the panelist a little earlier, I felt that you meant we should all work together to resolve these issues. No, not one person is able to do it, but all together we can definitely make a difference out there. Eliane, can I ask you what are the advantages? Let's say we do it. We increase the equity, the diversity in STEM and leadership and other areas in terms of mitigating sustainability challenges and socioeconomic impact. What are the advantages that you see? You mentioned statistics earlier. Yes, women are successful in business. Indigenous people are successful in business. What we need is to change that. But how do you see the advantages unrolling?
So I think there are numerous advantages. Just simply this idea of empowering women in the world, having women fully engage in STEM, have women and girls being able to study and work in fields where they don't face barriers to advance are critical. And what we know from Project Drawdown in terms of just empowering women in terms of family planning, that we could avoid 120 billion tons of emissions there. I mean, so they're very concrete. Empowering female smallholder farmers in the world could be the solution to food security and regenerative agriculture that can help us have agriculture become a source of mitigation and not greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So there are so many ways in terms of, I just think of Canada's 2030 and 2050 strategies and engaging Indigenous populations around stewardships, around nature, and how we decide to move forward in terms of which parts of Canada we should protect in terms of the 30 by 30, and how do we truly achieve net zero by 2050. Adding, having a two-wide seeing framework where we're using Western science and Indigenous knowledge systems would empower us to accelerate Canada's pathways towards those targets. We know that Canada isn't meeting its current targets. And so we need to accelerate what we're doing if we're going to meet the ambitions that Canada has put in place. And so those are really critical. And if we do that globally, we can keep the temperature within the IPCC's recommendations. But right now we're failing on many of the sustainable development goals globally. And so without this inclusive innovation moving forward, we really don't have a chance in terms of humanity. We see what's happening in British Columbia. I just think of the 1,000-year-old trees that keep getting cut down today when there are so many other technological frameworks we could use in terms of the products that those trees that are being cut down. Those are they're carbon sinks that are completely lost and we will never get back. And so we have to think about the irrevocable carbon sinks that are present today, and how are we protecting them, and how can we use Indigenous knowledge to ensure that this is brought into policy frameworks and we don't go into these spaces where Canada has a fourth of the wetlands of the planet. And so Canada has immense opportunities to lead in climate. And I think, I love what Alison was saying in terms of the BDC's initiatives that are really showing immense leadership in terms of gender equality and moving forward BIPOC capacity to contribute to entrepreneurship. And we need to see these initiatives amplified everywhere if we really want to stop the types of disasters we're seeing today.
Absolutely. Anyone else would like to comment on that question, on the advantages of seeing this difference happen? Let's say we succeed. No? All right. Sophie, you're next. How can Canada and other nations increase representation of underrepresented groups and diversity in STEM? You were talking about, we're not going fast enough and hard enough with AI, with engineering, mathematics, and physical science. It takes a long time still. And are there any good practices or model that you would highlight? And as a rector of a university, what can you do to change that reality that we have? And, I hear so often women I talk to and they say, I don't want to be hired because I'm a woman. Yet we need to do something to increase those numbers somehow.
It's an important question, not an easy one. I'll just start by giving the broader picture in the universities and at our university. In 2019, 63% of the students who got their diploma were women, all discipline. And there's a large number of disciplines where women are overrepresented. If I said that, I can say something like that, but they are participating in a greater number. So when we ask women, why do you select a discipline compared to another one, there are multiple answers to that question, as you can imagine. But what Alison was saying earlier, a sense of purpose is for sure very high in the decision-making of women when they go to university. And obviously they want their financial autonomy. They want to be able to be accomplished, get the tools to move forward and do something that they feel extremely rewarding. And so I think that there is a way to present STEM in this perspective, but we have not been so efficient in doing so. So there's something about changing the message and changing the organization itself, changing the way we teach STEM, changing the way we welcome women in the different organizations, the companies that are going to develop the different technologies or software or so on in the future. How are we designing the workspace? How are we doing so that this organization is led in a more inclusive way? And that is a part that has not been so much, I would say, it's been studied, and we know that, for example, we've been saying that people need to adapt. They need to adapt to their workplace, and women needs to adapt to the workplace, but they don't want that. There's a quite a significant leak in the pipeline when even the women entering in STEM, they will pull out of the STEM fields as they move on in their career for a different reason. But so we need to be concerned of that, and we need to try to change the organization and include different leadership. In university in general, we're getting close to parity in terms of women professor and men professor. It's not parity in all sectors. It's all across. In a university like Université Laval, where we teach many disciplines. But as you go on, if one woman step up in a leadership position, 3 men will step up in a leadership position. So that isn't, for me, it's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for women to see that there is opportunities out there. But the system, the organization need to change. One thing I've heard all my life, I've heard that, for example, that I need to accept to be called guys. Guys in France, c'est les gars. So I'm not a garçon, I'm a woman. If I work in technology, I want to be identified as a woman. I don't want to be identified as a man. I want to be part of the team. I'm excited to do teamwork, but this question of recognizing the person, recognizing who she is very important. Other aspect of it is that in a meeting room, women are more likely to be interrupted. So this is documented. So when you're in a room and you want to express yourself, and we accept that people interrupt you, and more often than the other, then there is a challenge. Then you disconnect and you décroche. You say, well, I don't have my place here. But this is very simple stuff. And then we tell you need to learn how to negotiate your salary. You say, I don't want to negotiate my salary. I want a fair salary. I want to be recognized for my talent. So I give different examples that when you develop inclusive leadership, you are sensitive to all of these things, and you make sure that people are recognized, people can be heard, and you develop a fair organization that is open, but concretely everyday work is conducted in that way. And obviously we need to address this message that engineering is there's a sense of purpose around this. It's important, it's fun, it is changing the world. So this is another part of it. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit long here. I'm trying to to provide a lot of more concrete, down to earth examples. So
no, it's very interesting and it's very true. And we do need those allies to help us to grow us, mentorship. We need other women to pull us up. And so all of this is very important. Alison,
that is
would
the
you like-
basic just
Wait.
We need to work with men. We need to change this society all together. It's not one group against the other. It's not our brothers and sisters from the First Nation against the other. It's all of us together. That is very important.
And definitely for challenges as big as climate change, we really need everyone to be there. Alison, how do you increase representative of all different ways, and how did BDC engage in this to hire more women and more people of color, more Indigenous people? How did you do it? Or did you do it? Are you there yet? You said about 40%, if my memory serves me right.
Well, that was, yeah. So maybe just to clarify, I think BDC as an organization certainly has a long way to go within its own organization to build its diversity, certainly, especially amongst the Indigenous and Black community, I would say in particular. I think women, we have made progress. What we are doing, when I was talking about our statistics, that is about the capital, of how we take the capital we invest out into the economy and distribute it amongst high potential young companies. And that, as I said, I think was really critical. It was a key observation that I think we made, especially within my team that invests in venture capital funds, is that if you don't give capital to women who are making those investment decisions, you've got to give the levers of power to women, as you do to Indigenous, to Black entrepreneurs, to Black fund managers, because they then make those investment decisions, as I said, bringing in a community of entrepreneurs that are unique networks that traditional capital allocators don't have, right? So that's really about getting capital out to a wider community. I think that's really critical. I think an observation that's really become so there's a lot of work in building that diversity, and I think Sophie touched on this. I think this issue of mentorship, of leadership, in the sense that you see yourself in organizations, and you see those mentors who bring you along,
yes,
and help you in a journey. And so what we see in the SME and in the entrepreneur community is to the extent that we can, fund, say, entrepreneurs who are coming from a more diverse community, whether Indigenous, Black, BIPOC women, they then build their own self-help networks, and then successful entrepreneurs in those communities give back and nurture the next generation. And then we grow those communities of assistance, and then they become much more part of the mainstream. And I think it's really important that we all see leaders in these respective communities who are mentoring and are building that network, because people are looking for that peer-to-peer support. And I think that goes on this issue of how to look at building sustainable practices in whatever walk of life whether you're building a business or you're building some other kind of organization where you're doing work. And I think one of the most interesting things I've discovered is that it was early on, is that even though venture capital is about building and supporting innovative companies, it's interesting that the way those companies are built are still quite conventional in the mindsets of the people who come together, which is that entrepreneurs who are mostly male, who are, putting compensation systems in place that don't acknowledge that women, want to take time off for children, or that, the teams might be interested in building a very inclusive culture more than they are, making sure that they have, the most competitive product in the market. Because if you don't work on the culture, you don't build the kind of innovation that creates the best services or products that ultimately get you there. And I think it's really interesting how I think, Caleb mentioned this, everyone's mentioned this, that just we really have to reorient our thinking about how organizations come together. And it's transformational, and it's scary, right? Because a lot of the status quo of leaders feel challenged by that. But I think we have to show that, leadership styles, can become more inclusive, and that can be good for everybody, I think. And I think that's a really important thing for the current leadership, wherever we are in our respective organizations. We have to feel that we have the confidence to have a more inclusive culture, bring more respective mindsets and representation in to achieve what we need to achieve. And I think ultimately where we have come is that, we're out monitoring the diversity of what we do. So we're tracking on an annual basis now. What is the underlying portfolio company's board of directors going to look like in terms of composition? How much money went to female entrepreneurs? How much went to, entrepreneurs of color? Like, if you don't measure, you can't get better. And so some of this as well is creating systems to track and try to grow and learn as you track that data of how you push and you keep pushing the industry to get better and better. So I think these are some of the learnings that we've discovered. You can have as I think many of people have said, you can have a much more concrete discussion when you have data about where we are and then where we
Absolutely.
need to get to.
And we're scientists, so we love data. Caleb, you wanted to also provide your view on that question of how can we increase representation?
Okay, I'll try it with video, and if I freeze, somebody text me, because that's just awkward talking to a screen.
Okay. Yeah.
2 big points. One, the thing about STEM is that it interfaces with social technologies. So to build upon Sophie's point, one thing that the BIPOC communities and First Nations in particular have great expertise in is how to render sacred and how to render valorous. We know how to valorize an action, and we know how to make sacred a given space. And as an ongoing and committed feminist, if I could render sacred and valorous all the innumerable experiences you, peers, colleagues have had that I'll never know about. I won't know all the crazy fights you fought. And then for the attendees and for my co-panelists, I'll never know the madness, the insanity, the bullshit old boys club crazy that you've had to deal with to get to where you are. Enough with tattoos. My life is a little bit different. I'm not fearful in a lot of spaces, and that's not fair. But what my people have in particular is deep knowledge of ceremony, and the crazy hats that we wear when we get the PhDs and all that, that's a societal, ceremonial rendering of sacred and valorous that Indigenous people, we could bring our societal technologies to this space to render sacred the difficult journey that you as co-panelists have had. I think there's deep expertise there. And this is my second point, on BIPOC, the temptation is to say, complex dynamic systems that have a high degree of diversity have a high degree of resilience. That's not, you can argue it in specifics, but whatever. The thing, though, is that an extractive analysis that is, I can get X, I can get some insight, I can get some synergy, I can become a disruptor because of this new perspective, that misunderstands the synergistic potential and necessity. And I would go deeper than just gender and inclusiveness and BIPOC and STEM. I would say deeper synergies are going to be necessary to solve the problem of sustainability in such a complex world. And I would just finish that point by saying the capacity to render sacred and render honorable and valorous, either retroactively, looking back at those hidden voices, hidden figures, and prospectively, those young ones following in the footsteps that you and others, my people as well, have tread and broken trail. That trans-temporal ability to render sacred and render honorable is probably going to be a critical social technology to overcome the problem of sustainability, in my view.
I couldn't agree more with you. We need social innovation to break that wall, really, and to make sure that we are transgressing all of what's stopping diversity today, for sure. So I couldn't agree more. And I'm looking forward to more social innovations as we go forward. Alison, what would be your key message for reducing existing gap and or increasing diversity towards achieving a more sustainable world? If you had one message, what would it be?
Well, I don't think I could say it any better than Caleb did, which is that I think innovation, like having innovation on all aspects of society, that's what it's about, right? It's not about, as I said, just here's a new widget that does something better that will help with climate change, because I suspect that new widget will never actually contribute, because the systems in place won't get it to the level of where it should to make a difference if it was founded by a BIPOC founder, or it was founded by somebody who's, seeing in an emerging market who can't get capital. Like, there's a lot of reasons success doesn't happen. And I think what we are talking about is that desire to see truly social organization innovation that as you said, Geneviève, that's just allows us to come together in different ways. And I'm a very big believer that that is more accessible to do than you think if you just distribute capital, and you distribute education, and you distribute resources to a diverse group of people, and they self-organize in a way to start making some of these differences that the rest of us can sort of learn from, and then continue support when we see the success coming from it. Really, because at the end of the day, that's what social innovation, like technology innovation, is, seeing all these great things happening across a country, across the world, and spotting talent and spotting greatness and trying to nurture it to get to another level. And I think that, we just have to create mechanisms to identify and support as much of that talent emerging as we can. And I think, we really didn't talk as much as we should have with, as Eliane mentioned, is that this, we're talking within the Canadian context, but boy, is there so much more to do when we think about the economic imbalances across the emerging markets versus the developed markets. That's just a whole other plane, and particularly critical on the sustainability equation. So innovation of any kind, I'd say bring it on. And whatever we can all do our role to help on that would be to me the key message.
Absolutely. And Eliane, you've put a few things in the discussion pane. So can I ask you to share with everyone your message there? You're talking about the imposter syndrome. Yes, sadly, when you can single out a person, it's easy for that person to feel that they have an imposter syndrome. You need 2, 3 women, 2, 3 Indigenous. You need people to form, small cells so that they can actually encourage one another. So Eliane, please go ahead.
So the problem is often we put it on the individual to find the solutions when it's systems we need to change. We have systems that make BIPOC and women feel that they don't belong, and that make them into imposters. And it's not that they've earned the credentials to be where they are, to have that seat at the table. I just think of working on this paper on artificial intelligence and bias with 2 female computer science professors who are tenured, and their own journey to becoming tenured and what they faced. And so this is in North America. I think the barriers are tremendous, and the biases are still great. And on the other side, I think of the African Institutes of Mathematical Sciences that I've been a champion of, that has their headquarters in Kigali and has campuses in South Africa and Rwanda, Senegal, Cameroon, and Ghana, and how they have a 30% minimum women in each cohort. And so these are graduate students in artificial intelligence and supercomputing that are looking at how do we address the challenges of the African continent using mathematics. And having those cohorts that have a significant amount of women is really critical to changing the system so that they don't have that imposter syndrome. And I think, here it's already embedded. We need to dismantle it. But in systems where everything is new, they need to be created, there is an opportunity to embed that right away. And I think of an initiative called Leaper Labs, where they have artificial intelligence fellows, and their new cohorts has 70% young women. And I think this is going to change how things happen in this space and how we change culture. And I loved what Caleb was saying around the sacred. How do we bring in the sacred? And it really comes down into what are the values that are defining the cultures we have that allow everybody to feel safe. And the reality is, for a lot of women and BIPOC people, it's unsafe the higher up you go. And so that's a reality that we need to dismantle. We need to make it safe for everybody to lead. We need to make it safe because we know technical solutions aren't enough. We need adaptive solutions that acquire emerging knowledge with transdisciplinary input and that allow all of us to contribute. And so we know we don't have the solutions, but collectively, if we come together, we can really have our collective intelligence be greater than our individual intelligences. And we can only do that if we make it safe for everybody to lead.
Diane, is there something like you would like to say as one of the key message that you would like to leave with people in terms of how can we reduce the existing gaps, increase diversity, and achieve a sustainable world?
I really love what Eliane just said, because I think to me that strikes a very, very deep chord in me. I think there's a couple of things I would add to this dialogue. The first is that, we have a language that we built up really around what are these sort of solutions. And we use things like role modeling and statistics, and they're valid. And I think, I agree with the point made earlier with scientists. We love our data. Certainly measuring something is, important to know that we've made progress. On the other hand, it can be a very intimidating framework when you're trying to build teams to work in. And I think leadership has to be authentic. And when women do grow in their careers and they get into leadership positions, it's very, very important that we are not replicating unconsciously the behaviors and the frameworks that we, in fact, lived through progressing. So in a sense, it's akin to thinking about imposter syndrome, but a little bit on the other end of the spectrum, that we have biases that we've been conditioned over the years that without real sort of considered thought and effort to make sure that we're overcoming it, to make sure that we show our vulnerabilities, because our vulnerabilities are our strength, that we talk actively about family, about children, about the things that actually have not been talked about as you go up in the ranks, because by doing so, you're starting to actually take away the barriers, whether they are perceived or real barriers, that hold people back, hold women back in particular. I think the other thing we can bring, and Caleb, I'll be a bit provocative by just saying this is something in women, because it's not really that true, but hope. It's hope. It's hope for the future, that the lens that we see these things through is not, it's through a lens of hope. And so that we can look at the way our young people express their views directly these days about all sorts of issues. My daughter, her partner, are able to express their views directly and confidently. They're two young women in non-traditional fields. They are confident about expressing their opinion. They are therefore the agent of mainstreaming to a different place. And so I am so hopeful when I see that, because they haven't carried baggage that maybe some of us have carried. And this risk of having this bias that we unconsciously are still continuing in our roles isn't there when I see them and I listen to them. They also have not been formed in the past by having negative reactions or being pushed down for expressing their views. Not at all. So culturally, I look at that and that gives me hope because I see that something has shifted along the way to be able to have supported, these individuals who are now sort of coming into their first sort of levels of professional engagement. But authenticity, I think, when it will communicate so much because then it takes away the sort of perceived barriers that we're vulnerable or we're not capable or that we don't aspire to something greater or that somehow it's a weakness if we talk about our journey or as I said, our family situation. I feel strongly that in my organization that sort of thing has made a very big impact. It's a small thing, it's an easy thing in many respects. But when leaders are approachable and people feel comfortable expressing, starting with their professional opinions, that will lead then to them expressing the deeper problems, the deeper issues. So, how do you create a safe space for those kind of dialogues? Is that, we have to, as leaders, not only show an openness with words, but by expressing and sharing our own vulnerabilities and our hopes, and others will follow. At least I feel very confident about that. I do very much agree, with Allison and Eliane on the point that going forward, from a societal perspective, there really will be no other way for us to succeed in Canada and, in fact, really as a species. And, what drove young people, what drove me into joining government was because I wanted to change things, right? So it really spoke to me, the point about women joining profession because, they actually want to make a difference. And that is a very powerful thing. If we have people who are feeling they want to make a difference in society, it is not about earning potential. It's not about what you own, but it's about the difference you make in society. That is such a powerful concept. And I think if more people talk about this in a mainstream way, um, I feel that this will allow the conversation to open and those voices that are there that maybe are predominant in some of these groups, like from women, it'll open it up to everybody to talk in this way. Thank you.
Yeah, this is so important. And I think we are agents of change and we have to embrace it. Sophie, de ton côté, comment tu vois justement tout ça? C'est quoi ton message clé à laisser derrière là, pour réduire les écarts?
Oui, c'est sûr que pour moi, c'est l'éducation. Okay? À la base, là, to provide availability to education to all. And what Diane was talking about resonated a lot here at Laval. When I started my mandate, there was an issue. It was difficult for parents who were studying in different programs to continue their study because of the rigidity of our own rules in regard of what was defining a full-time student and all the privilege that came with that status. So we changed the system. We looked at it in a way that we decided that if you are a parent and that you are studying, it's more likely that you will not be able to keep a full-time registration at the university. And so we open up there, and it changed the story of many of our students. We have 19% of our students which are parents at Université Laval. Another aspect was our First Nation students. It was difficult for them to enter a program which were contingentés. And then again, we really did a lot of work to understand why. We could see that the candidacy were fantastic they were just not conventional in regard of our methodology to say that they should be accepted or not. So we changed that. So we developed new ways to appreciate talent and capacity to succeed in the different programs. And we've opened up to make it more accessible. So I do believe that we can change the system and we can make it more inclusive, and that requires a lot of discussion, and you are all right on that aspect. A lot of making sure we go deep into the how we do things and understand the barriers and lift the barriers as we go on. And I think that this is changing. The other thing that we've done in the perspective of the youth, when we're talking about sustainability, we need to make sure that we protect the voice of the youth, de la jeunesse. It's their big challenge. It's their challenge to succeed. And we are there to make sure that we are by their side, we are supporting and bringing them, giving them all the capacity to develop their talent. So one thing we did was to make sure that we built an international network of students which are leaders in their own institution all around the world in terms of sustainability initiative, and make sure that they share their good ideas, best practice, and get involved and see that people like them are doing the same thing elsewhere, and that they can be linked all together. So that UNICE network is a fantastic platform for linking, local initiative to global perspective all the time. So that's another way that we've decided to move forward. So just example of things that can be done, and they can be done. And I'm very positive. I'll end with this. La jeunesse, là, elle me rend très fière. The youth make me very proud, and I believe in their capacity. So it's worth being there by their side.
Merci beaucoup à toutes. Malheureusement, Caleb a encore perdu la connectivité. But he's on our mind, of course. Thank you all. If I could resume everything that we've said, really we need the input of social sciences to go forward, to feed us with, the means, the social innovation that will make a difference. And I think that's very important. We need to keep the dialogues going. We need to recognize our biases. We have biases. Everyone has biases. We need to recognize them in order to address them. And we need everybody to work on that. And to recognize that we are all agents of change. As leaders, as co-workers, we need to change the environment in which we evolve to make it more inclusive and all work together toward inclusiveness. And there's two words that I would like to keep for the end. There's Diane that said hope, and how hope is important. Sophie just said how hope is there because the next generation is coming, and there are beautiful adults coming up to come and help us with to continue the work that we have started. And the second, I think, is the one of conviction. We definitely, and Caleb is saying he's here in spirit, so thank you, Caleb. I know you're there listening. So definitely the conviction that we can all work together and build for the future. So thank you all. There were no questions, I think it's because people were so interested in what you had to say. We had great representation. We had great attendees at this meeting. So thank you all. Merci beaucoup. Ça m'a fait vraiment plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. And good continuation of the CSPC. And hopefully we'll see you around. So if you would like to talk to Caleb, if you would like to talk to any of our speakers today, don't hesitate to reach them. You can reach them with the attendees list and so on. So look them up and continue the dialogue. That's what's most important. And let's have some thoughts for our friends, our relatives, our brothers and sisters that are in BC and those that are in Nova Scotia. I hear that there's empty shelves in BC. So let's hope it doesn't last like this too long and everybody is doing fine. Merci beaucoup. Merci d'être avec nous. Au revoir.